You've seen treasure decks, you've seen clue decks, but have you ever seen a food deck? Almost nobody has, because no one is playing this commander. And the best part, you can build this entire deck for less than €100. Hurska Sweet Tooth. At the time of recording this video, there are only 638 Hurska decks on EDH rec, which is literally 0.01% of all decks. In other words, nobody is playing this bear, which is absolutely wild because Hurska is adorable. I mean, seriously, just look at the art. If Wizards doesn't eventually print a Winnie the Pooh secret lair with Hurska in it, I'll be really surprised. And yes, that is a little cute sheep bumblebee next to her. Absolute peak design. So what does Hurska actually do? For just 3 mana, you get a 3/3 bear with 2 really simple abilities that synergize perfectly with each other. First, whenever Hurska attacks, you get to create a food token. Nice and steady value every combat step. And the second ability, and this is where things get really interesting, whenever you gain life, you can pay either a green or a white mana and target creature will get +X until the end of turn. X being the amount of life you just gained. That means every food token you sacrifice can suddenly turn into a free giant growth at minimum, and it gets way crazier than that. A single big life gain spell can suddenly turn into a +10/+10 pump out of nowhere, turning one of your harmless creatures into a huge threat. And because you can use this ability on instant speed, your opponents will never be safe from random blowouts. Now there are a ton of ways you can actually build a Hurska deck. You can build this around generic life gain cantrips, you could do a Voltron build, or you can even choose to run a classic Soul Sisters package. But for this video, I wanted to take a different path. Food tokens. I've been wanting to make a food deck for a while, and once I saw Hurska, I knew I had the perfect excuse to do so. And honestly, I've never played or faced a food deck in Commander before, so this deck was an absolute blast to build. This deck is built on a €100 budget, making it the perfect deck for your casual or semi-casual tables. Or the perfect deck with the cutest commander of all time if you want to get your girlfriend into Magic. And since most life gain cards range somewhere from random uncommons to very expensive staple cards, I've also included the most lengthy upgrade section I've ever done on this channel. So if you do want to max out this cute little bear, I got you covered. A cute bear, insane pumps, food synergies, and a ton of fun. Let's get this deck started. As per usual, I will be going over every single card in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up in 8 categories: the food synergies, life gain effects, life gain payoffs and finishers, acceleration, draw and support, protection and interaction, the lands, and a very lengthy upgrade section. Let's get started by talking about the food synergies. For this build, I decided to lean fully into the food plan, since Hurska churns out food tokens naturally whenever she attacks. These cards are the engine of the deck. They either generate us more food tokens or they turn our food tokens into actual value. Astrid Pert. Whenever this 2-drop creature enters the battlefield or attacks, we get to create a food token, giving us immediate value in the form of a food token as soon as we play it, and then it functions in the same way as Hurska does. Every combat when we swing with her, we just get to generate more and more food tokens. This ability in itself is already really good, but the main reason why it's included in the deck is the second ability. Whenever we sacrifice a clue or a food token, this creature explores. Explore basically means we have to reveal the top card of our library. If that card is a land card, we just get to put it into our hand. If the revealed card isn't a land card, this creature will get a +1/+1 counter, and we get to choose if we want to keep that card on top of our deck or actually put it into our graveyard. This card will basically do one of 2 things. Or it will give you some sort of pseudo card advantage, because if you hit a land, you just get to put it in your hand and essentially draw it. And it will allow you to manipulate the top card of your library. If you hit something that you don't need at a given board state, you can just toss it into your graveyard. And thanks to the counters it will get from exploring, this is a growing creature body that your opponents will have to deal with at some point. Samwise Gamgee. For as long as this creature is on the battlefield, whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to create a food token. And since we play a total of 37 creatures in this deck, the amount of food tokens this card will generate you is just absolutely insane. And on top of that, it has an awesome activated ability that will turn those food tokens into actual value. You can sacrifice 3 food tokens to return any historic permanent from your graveyard to your hand. Historic permanents being artifacts, legendary cards, and sagas. Now the main way you will be using this ability in this deck is returning your legendary creatures that died throughout the course of the game from your graveyard to your hand. A perfect way to turn your food tokens into an actual recursion tool. If your opponents use removal on one of your most valuable legendary creatures, you can just sacrifice 3 food tokens, return it to your hand, you can play it again, and the nightmare will start all over again for your opponents. Trail of Crumbs, a 2 mana enchantment that whenever it enters the battlefield will generate you a food token. Whenever we sacrifice a food, we get the ability to pay 1 additional generic mana. When we do, we get to look at the top 2 cards of our library. Then from amongst those 2 cards, we can reveal 1 permanent card and put it directly into our hand. The other card goes to the bottom of our library. As you will see later in this video, we will be able to generate a huge amount of food tokens and we will continuously be sacrificing them. What this card then essentially does is give you card advantage. For the low cost of 1 generic mana, you just get to draw an additional card of that. And it's actually even better than drawing because you get to look at the top 2 cards and pick the best one of those 2 cards. Since we are in Selesnya colors, we really don't have access to that much card draw. So just getting the ability to turn little bits of our mana into actual card draw is just fantastic for this deck. Academy Manufacturer, a 3 mana 1/3 artifact creature. And if you've ever played against a treasure or a clue based deck, you already know this card. Whenever you would generate either a treasure, a clue, or a food token, you now get to create all 3 of those instead. Yeah, I know, the value on this is just absolutely out of control. As you've already seen in the few cards that I talked about, we will be able to generate an absolutely absurd amount of food tokens. Either be it by playing creatures with Samwise Gamgee on the field or just whenever you swing with Hurska. Now, in addition to that, you will also get to create that many clue and treasure tokens. This is a really mana hungry deck because we will need the mana to actually crack our food tokens and to activate Hurska's ability. So you will always have a use for the insane amount of treasure tokens that this card will generate you. And as I mentioned before, card draw really is a problem for Selesnya decks, and the clue tokens are just a fantastic solution to that. If you find yourself at a point in the game where you do have the mana available but no cards in your hand, you can just start cracking the clue tokens to get some actual card advantage out of that. Field Tested Frying Pan, a 3 mana equipment card. Whenever this card enters the battlefield, we get to create a food token and a 1/1 halfling token, and then we auto attach this equipment to the halfling token. Already a really cost effective card because it will auto equip to a creature token as soon as it enters the battlefield. And this equipment will give the equipped creature a new line of text. Whenever you would gain any amount of life, this creature will gain +X until the end of turn, X being the amount of life you just gained. This ability is basically Hurska's activated ability, but you don't even have to pay any mana for it. If you crack a food token, you will gain 3 life and the creature will gain +3/+3. If you have 5 instances of 1 life gain in a single turn, the creature will get 5 times +1/+1 until the end of turn. And if you cast a big spell that gains you 7 life, the creature will get +7/+7. The amount of value you get out of this equipment in the form of raw stats is absolutely insane in this deck. And you can easily double up on the value this equipment gives you. Because for example, if you gain 3 life, the creature will already get a 3/3 stat boost. Then you can just pay 1 additional mana with Hurska and it will double up on the stat boost the creature gets, actually giving it a +6/+6 stat boost. If you are able to get this card equipped onto one of your trample creatures, you can close out the game really fast. Peregrine Took, by far one of the best creatures in the entire deck. If 1 or more tokens would be created under our control, we get to generate that amount of tokens plus 1 food token in addition to that. Since we play a ton of cards in this deck that either generate us creature tokens or food tokens, the amount of value this card will generate you is just beyond crazy. Every time you play a creature with Samwise Gamgee on the field, you will now get to generate 2 food tokens. Attacking with Hurska will now give you 2 food tokens. And if you create a creature token with one of our late game win conditions, you will now also get an additional food token on top of that. That ability alone would be enough to include this card in the deck. But on top of that, it even has an activated ability, which might even be more more crazy than the first ability. On instant speed, we can sacrifice 3 food tokens to draw a card. It's really easy for us to generate like a million food tokens, but we do have a hard time drawing cards in this deck. And this card just allows you to turn food tokens into actual card draw, actually turning one of the easiest things we can do in this deck into a solution for this deck's weak point. Sam, Loyal Attendant. At the beginning of combat on our turn, Sam will generate us 1 food token. Just a nice little way to get some extra foods on the field. And the real reason why it's included in the deck is because the activated ability costs of any food we control are reduced by 1 generic mana. Instead of having to pay 2 mana to sacrifice a food token, we can now just pay 1 mana for it. This deck can get quite mana intensive because you will need to pay 2 mana to sacrifice a food token and then pay 1 additional mana to actually activate Hurska, costing you a total of 3 mana to actually gain life and boost your creatures. Now thanks to Sam, you can reduce the total cost of this some sort of value combo to a total of 2 mana, making the entire deck way more efficient because you will be able to sacrifice more food tokens, which then in turn will allow you to get more activations out of Hurska's ability. The Cabbage Merchant, a new card from the upcoming Avatar The Last Airbender set. And this card has such crazy synergies with food tokens, it will probably spawn some new food-based decks all by itself. The first ability will generate you a food token whenever an opponent casts any non-creature spell. So whenever an opponent plays a Mana Rock, a Farseek, a card draw spell, a counter spell, whatever, we get to create a food token. And you can't underestimate how crazy this ability is, because nowadays in modern day Magic, every deck will be playing a ton of non-creature spells. Usually when you drop this and you just go for 1 turn cycle, you will have an additional 4, 5, 6 food tokens. The third ability, which is probably even more crazy, allows us to tap 2 untapped food tokens we control, and we get to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, allowing us to turn our food tokens into mana, which is absolutely crazy. As you've already seen, outside of this card's first ability, which will generate us an immense amount of food tokens, we do play a million ways to get a ton of food tokens on the battlefield. When you then drop the Cabbage Merchant, you will just be able to empty your entire hand at once. To balance this card, they actually gave it a downside, being its second ability. Whenever any creature deals combat damage to you, you have to sacrifice a food token. This ability gives your opponents an actual way to deal with your food tokens. Because let's say you control 5 food tokens, an opponent swings 3 creatures at you, you will now lose 3 of those food tokens. It's a pretty big downside, but honestly you can just play around this effect. You can just leave blockers open to actually prevent your opponents from dealing combat damage to you. And this card will always be generating you more food tokens than you will actually be losing to him. And let's be honest, this ability is pretty flavorful. Because if you actually watch the Avatar anime, the Cabbage Merchant is a dude that always comes up with new cabbages, being food tokens. And whenever one of the main characters hit his cabbage card, he actually loses all of his cabbages. Thumbs up to the Wizards design team for designing this iconic character and giving him a really flavorful ability. Tireless Provisioner, a classic card used in many decks nowadays. It's a 3 mana creature with the landfall ability. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to create either a treasure token or a food token. Now 99% of the decks that run this card use it to generate treasure tokens and accelerate their mana. Now in this deck you can actually use both options on this card. If you want to accelerate your mana, you just create a treasure token, or if you need extra food tokens for any of your food synergies or just for some life gain, you can also use that effect. And since we do play a ton of mana acceleration in this deck that actually allows us to put lands straight from our deck onto the battlefield, we can get some insane value out of this card. Apothecary White, a 4 mana 3/4 vigilance body. Whenever we attack, we get to create 1 food token for each opponent that's being attacked. If you have 3 creatures on the battlefield and you just swing 1 creature at each one of your opponents, every single combat phase on your turn you will be generating 3 additional food tokens. Or let's say you're just swinging with 1 creature, you still just get the 1 food token, which is still pretty okay value. And on top of that, it has an activated ability that will generate us creature tokens based on the amount of food we control. For 1 white mana, tapping this creature and tapping any amount of untapped food tokens we control, we get to create X 1/1 soldier tokens. X being the amount of food tokens we tapped. Now in my experience in this deck, you will always have a huge amount of food tokens you can't use because you don't have the mana to sacrifice all of them. At all times, you will be controlling somewhere between 5 to 10 food tokens, which this creature will then turn into a huge amount of board presence. Eleanor Gardner. Whenever this 4 mana creature enters the battlefield, we get to create a food token. And at the beginning of our end step, if we sacrifice a food token this turn, we get to search our library for any basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Now this card is basically a repeatable rampant growth that will allow us to accelerate our mana and get a basic land out of our deck every single one of our turns. Because we will be sacrificing at least one food token every single turn, be it to effects like Peregrine Took or just to boost up our creatures with Hurska. And like I mentioned, this deck is really mana hungry, so just allowing you to get additional lands into play that you can then use to crack additional food tokens or get additional Hurska activations is just fantastic for this type of deck. Knight of the Sweet's Revenge. A 4 mana enchantment that whenever we play it will generate us 1 food token. And this card gives all our food tokens an additional ability. We can tap a food token to add 1 green mana to our mana pool, essentially turning all of our food tokens into mana rocks. Like I mentioned earlier, you will always control an insane amount of food tokens. And this enchantment just allows you to turn those into mana. You don't even have to sacrifice them to actually get the mana out of them. That ability alone honestly would be enough to include this card in the deck, but on top of that, it also has an activated ability that actually can act as a game finisher in this deck. For the huge cost of 7 mana and sacrificing this enchantment, all our creatures will get +X until the end of turn, X being the amount of food tokens we control. Now 7 mana might seem like a really high cost for this type of effect, but remember this enchantment will allow us to tap food tokens for mana, so you usually can easily pay this cost. And then you basically get a free overrun effect you can use to just take all your opponents out of the game with one big swing. Sadly, this card doesn't give trample like an actual overrun, but that would be absolutely busted on this type of card. Sierra, Nuka's biggest fan. Whenever one or more creatures we control would deal combat damage to an opponent, we get to put a quest counter on this creature and we also get to generate a food token. And whenever we sacrifice a food token for any reason, target creature will get +X until the end of turn. X being the amount of quest counters that this creature has on her. So this card both serves as an excellent food token generator, and it will also give you an immense amount of value whenever you crack any of your food tokens. You can just crack a food token for 2 mana to gain life and you will gain the effect of this card, but you can also sacrifice your food tokens to any other effect we play in the deck. For example, when you sacrifice 3 food tokens to a Peregrine Took to draw a card, you will get 3 triggers out of this card, translating in an absolute insane amount of stat boosting for any of your creatures. And this card works in the same way as a professional phase breaker, since it says whenever one or more opponents take combat damage from creatures you control, in a best case scenario where your opponents can block any of your creatures and you can get combat damage through on all your opponents, you will actually get to generate 3 food tokens and you will get to put 3 quest counters on this card. And the last card in this section is Treebeard Gracious Host, a 4 mana 0/5 creature with trample and ward 2. Whenever Treebeard enters the battlefield, we get to generate 2 food tokens. And whenever we gain life, we get to put that many +1/+1 counters on target Tree Folk or Halfling. Now this creature turns any source of life gain we have in this deck into actual value and board presence by turning it into +1/+1 counters for our creatures. Now we do play a total of 5 Halflings in this deck, but usually you will just be stacking the counters on this creature. And that is because it is a trample body and you can actually deal a huge amount of damage with this card, and it also has ward 2. So if your opponents actually do want to use spot removal on this creature, they will have to pay an additional 2 mana to do so. The perfect creature body to carry all your counters and grow into a 50 power threat. Next up, we have the Lifegain Effects. These cards either improve the Lifegain effects in this deck or they give us additional ways to gain life outside of our food tokens. They ensure even whenever we don't control any food tokens for any reason whatsoever, we can still get some Lifegain synergies in this deck. Fortifying Draught, a 1 mana instant speed spell that will gain us 2 life whenever we cast it. Then target creature will get +X, X being the amount of life we gained this turn. Now I know know I'm not that big of a fan of any sort of instant speed combat tricks either, but this card is just way too good in this type of deck not to include. Just imagine it like this. You swing Hurska at one of your opponents. Your opponents decide not to block Hurska and you go to the damage step. Then you sacrifice one food token and you activate Hurska's ability. This will gain you 3 life and give Hurska a +3/+3 stat boost. Hurska will now be at 6 power. Then you cast a Fortifying Draught, gaining you an additional 2 life, and you decide to activate Hurska of this. This will give Hurska another +2/+2 stat boost, making her go to 8 power. Then the effect of Fortifying Draught kicks in and this will give Hurska an additional +5/+5 stat boost, making her go to 13 power since you did gain 5 life this turn. This will result in you dealing a huge amount of damage to any of your opponents. And this is just giving you an example by sacrificing one food token. As you will see later in this section, there are a few cards in this deck that will gain you an immense amount of life gain. And a card like Fortifying Draught will then just allow you to take your opponents by surprise and take them out with hitting the 21 commander damage. Feed the Clan, a 2-mana instant speed spell that will gain you 5 life. And it also has the Ferocious mechanic, meaning if you control a creature with 4 or greater power, you will actually gain 10 life instead of the 5. Now just imagine the previous card, Fortifying Draught, combined with a card that actually gains you 10 life. You can just cast this card, then activate Hurska, and target creature will get +10/+10 until the end of turn. Then you can follow up with a Fortifying Draught and the creature will get an additional +12/+12, resulting in a 22/22 stat boost for the low cost of 4 mana. And yes, all of that can be done on instant speed, so you will be able to surprise your opponents by this. Inscription of Abundance, a 2-mana instant speed spell that allows you to pick 1 out of 3 fantastic options. The first option allows you to put 2 +1/+1 counters on any creature. This is the least interesting out of all the options on this card, but I suppose it can help you to grow your board. The second option allows you to gain life equal to the greatest power amongst creatures you control, turning this into an instant speed spell that has the ability to grant you a huge amount of life gain in one instance, which is just perfect for Hurska's ability. And the third option allows you to make target creature you control fight target creature you don't control, acting as some sort of a removal spell. And the best part about this card is that it has the kicker ability. If you pay an additional 3 mana whenever you cast this, instead of just picking 1 out of the 3 options, you actually get to use all 3 options, making this into a really versatile card for 2 mana or a really game-changing card for 5 mana. Rest for the Wary, a 2-mana instant speed spell that will gain you 4 life. But if you had a land enter the battlefield under your control this turn, instead of gaining 4 life, you will gain 8 life. And we played this card for the same reason as we play Feed the Clan. Another 2-mana instant speed spell that will give you a huge amount of life gain, and just by paying 1 mana with Hurska on the field, this will become a +8/+8 stat boost, which we can use to deal an immense amount of damage to an opponent in combat, or we can also use our huge power creatures to leverage in other ways, which I will be talking about in the support section of this video. Caduceus, Staff of Hermes, a 3-mana equipment that will give the equipped creature lifelink. Now sadly, unless you give your creatures first strike, you can't actually swing creatures lifelink and then boost the power of them by using Hurska. Since the damage will be done, then you will gain the life and you won't actually be able to use Hurska to turn that life into a stat boost and deal additional damage. That being said, lifelink will always be really good in this deck, because if you can just boost the power of a creature to insane amounts with Hurska and then swing with it, if that creature then has lifelink, you will gain an immense amount of life and it will be really hard for your opponents to take you out of the game. And as you will see later in this video, we do play a ton of cards that actually care about us gaining a ton of life, even though we can't use it for Hurska. But the main reason why we play this card is its second passive ability. For as long as we are at 30 or more life, the equipped creature will get a massive +5/+5 stat boost. It will become indestructible and all damage dealt to that creature will be prevented. Since in Commander you start at 40 life and we are a life gain deck, you can be sure we will always be at more than 30 life. And if you're not, you can just start sacrificing some food tokens to actually get to 30 life. This equipment just functions as a fantastic protection tool for either Hurska or any of your other value creatures. Rock's Fate Mender, a 4-mana 1/5 creature with lifelink, and he has a really simple yet really strong passive ability. If we would gain life, we get to gain twice twice that much life instead. I know, I probably don't have to explain how good this is, but let me just give you a few examples. Any food token you crack will now gain you 6 life. If you then pay 1 additional mana with Hurska, any creature will get a +6/+6 stat boost. If you play a Feed the Clan, which normally would gain you 10 life, you will now get to gain 20 life. And Hurska can turn this into a +20/+20 stat boost. Any amount of life you would gain from lifelink creatures will now also be doubled. And as you will see later in this video, we do play a ton more cards that will gain us life in some way. So this card and this type of effect is just insane in this deck. Now that we're talking about doubling the amount of life we gain, the Wind Crystal. A 4 mana legendary artifact that has exactly the same effect as the previous card. Whenever we would gain life, we get to gain twice that amount of life instead. Just giving us the same benefits as I just talked about with Rock's Fate Mender. And yes, these effects do stack. So if you have both Rocks and this card on the battlefield, whenever you crack a food token, you will now get to gain 12 life of that. On top of that, it also reduces the mana cost of any white spell we cast by 1 generic mana, just basically accelerating us by making our spells cheaper. And if that's not good enough for you, it even has an activated ability for 6 mana and tapping it. All our creatures will get flying and lifelink until the end of turn. Yeah, this ability is just absolutely bananas. Just giving your entire board flying and then just buffing them up with Hurska will allow you to win the game. And any amount of damage you will do, you will lifelink back and you will gain a huge amount of life of that, which then will be doubled because you have the Wind Crystal on the battlefield. Trading Post, one of my personal favorite cards of all time. It's a 4 mana artifact with 4 activated abilities, which all cost 1 generic mana and require you to tap Trading Post. The first ability allows you to discard a card and gain 4 life, which will trigger any sort of life gain synergy in this deck, and you can turn it into a stat boost by using Hurska. The second ability allows us to pay 1 life and create a 0/1 goat token, which you can then use to chum block. If someone, for example, is swinging their 60/60 creature at you, just tap a Trading Post, create a goat token, and you will survive. The third ability allows us to sacrifice a creature to return an artifact card from our graveyard to our hand. A perfect way if someone destroys your Wind Crystal to just get it back to your hand and then just recast it again. And the fourth option allows us to sacrifice an artifact to draw a card. Another way to actually convert our food tokens into card advantage. None of the options on Trading Post are broken, but just the fact that you have all these options combined on one single card makes it just absolutely insane in my opinion. Silverback Elder, a massive 5 mana 5/7 Ape Shaman creature. Whenever we cast a creature spell, we get to pick 1 out of 3 options. First option allows us to destroy target artifact or enchantment, a perfect way to deal with some problematic cards on the battlefield like a Phyrexian Altar, Aura Shards, Rhystic Study. The second option allows us to look at the top 5 cards of our library, then reveal a land card from amongst them and put it onto the battlefield tapped, actually accelerating our mana. And the last option will allow us to gain 4 life. Interaction, acceleration, or life gain. Aragon and Arwen. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature we control and then gain 1 life for each other creature we control, resulting in a card that will boost the power and toughness of our entire board, and it will also give us a huge life gain trigger, which we can then turn into even more value with Hurska. And since this card will give its life gain trigger on attack, you can still use Hurska at that time to boost the creature's power before even going to the damage step. Honestly, this card isn't the best curve topper you can play in the deck, but it's just a fantastic version if you do want to play the budget version of Hurska. Angren Marauder. Whenever an artifact is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, we get the option to gain 5 life. And this ability is just ridiculous in a food deck, because now whenever you sacrifice a food token, you get to gain 3 life of the food token, and because the food token goes to the graveyard, you then will get the option to gain another 5 life, which you can then with Hurska for the low cost of 1 mana turn into a +5/+5 stat boost. And it doesn't stop there, because this card doesn't specify that you have to control the artifact. So whenever an opponent is using treasure tokens, clue tokens, or even whenever you're playing against an artifact player, the amount of life gain triggers you will get of this card is absolutely ridiculous. One of my favorite and honestly one of the strongest cards in the entire deck. Now before we get into the Lifegain payoffs and finishers we play in this deck, a quick shout out to all the YouTube members who make this channel possible. Seriously, all of you are the reason that I can keep doing what I love doing most. So if you are enjoying these really in-depth deck tech videos, or you're just using these videos to fall asleep to my voice, consider joining the YouTube membership program. You'll get early access to the deck lists of these videos before the videos even go live. You'll get access to exclusive Discord channels where I will be sharing sneak peeks as to what decks I'm currently working on. And you'll get access to some awesome Panzer MTG emojis you can use anywhere on Discord or YouTube. So if that sounds fun, or you just want to support your favorite MTG content creator, just hit the join button below the video or check out the link in the description below. Next up, we have the Lifegain payoffs and the finishers. Lifegain alone won't win us any games, but these cards make sure it does. They convert our Lifegain into overwhelming board presence, explosive damage, or just some absolutely ridiculous value. This section is where this deck shifts from, wow, that's a really cute bear, to, whoa, Hurska is an absolute monster. And let's get started by talking about a creature that, in my opinion, is honestly the strongest win condition in this entire deck. Champion of the Lambhold. I know, this creature seems really out of place in a deck that's not based on +1/+1 counter synergies, but hear me out. Let's start by talking about the second ability. Whenever a creature enters a battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of Lambhold. Now in this deck we're not able to generate a huge amount of creature tokens, and we won't really be swarming the board with that many creatures. But that being said, over the course of the game, this creature will actually grow into a significant body. Now let's talk about this card's first ability. Creatures with power less than Champion of Lambhold's power can block creatures you control. Let me just emphasize this. Any creature that has less power than this creature will not be able to block any creature you control. So if this creature is at 10 power and your opponents don't control a creature with 10 power, this card will essentially make your entire board unblockable. And the synergy that this type of effect has with Hurska's stat boosting is just absolutely insane. Because let's say you're just playing the game, yada yada, everyone is playing creature spells, haha, very funny, and you do have a couple of creatures on the board. Then you decide to play a Feed the Clan, you gain 10 life, and you decide to boost Champion of Lambhold's power by 10. Let's say Champion of Lambhold is now at like 15 power thanks to the counters or whatever. If your opponents don't control a 15 power creature, which I'm sure they won't, you can now just swing your entire board at any of your opponents and there isn't a single one of your creatures that your opponents can block. And you get this absolutely insane ability on a 3-drop body. If you didn't know Champion of Lambhold, or you really underestimated how good this card can really be, go to the comment section and comment Champion of Lambhold in all caps underneath the video. Latiel, the Bounteous Down, a 4-mana 2/2 lifelink creature that will turn any point of life gain we have into +1/+1 counters. At the beginning of each end step, if we gained life this turn, we get to distribute that many +1/+1 counters on creatures we control. As you know by now, in this deck we will be gaining life every single one of our turns. And Latiel just rewards us by doing what we already want to do in the form of massive amounts of +1/+1 counters. A food token will give 3 counters, a Feed the Clan will give 10 counters, and any amount of lifelink we get will also translate in that many +1/+1 counters. And obviously this is just the perfect target to start buffing with Hurska, because whenever you buff this, thanks to the lifelink, whenever this creature has a huge amount of power, it will give you a huge amount of life and it will give a huge amount of counters. Blossoming Bogbeast. This card is basically a 5-mana Crater Hoof Behemoth for life gain decks. Whenever this creature attacks, we get to gain 2 life. Then all of our creatures will get +X and trample until the end of turn. X being the amount of life we gain this turn. So baseline, whenever you attack with this creature, your entire board will already get +2 and trample, which honestly for just a 5-drop creature is already really crazy value. Now just imagine before you swing with this creature, you actually crack 2 food tokens. Now your entire board will get a massive +8 and trample until the end of turn. yeah, this card is arguably better than a Crater Hoof Behemoth minus the haste in a Lifegain deck. Crested Sunmare, a 5 mana 5/5 horse. At the beginning of each end step, if we gained life this turn, we get to create a 5/5 horse token. Yeah, that's a pretty huge token body. And what makes this card absolutely crazy is that it checks this criteria at the beginning of each end step. So if you are able to just crack a food token or gain some life during your opponent's turns, this card will be able to generate you 4 horses in one single turn cycle, giving you a total of 20 power and toughness on the board by doing a simple thing like cracking food tokens and just gaining some life. And on top of that, this card will give all other horses you control indestructible. So you actually get indestructible 5/5 horse tokens for as long as this creature is on the battlefield. Before making this deck, I didn't even know a crazy, weird and strong card like this horse existed. Gwai'hirsh, Greatest of the Eagles, a 5 mana 5/5 flying body. And whenever this creature attacks, another attacking creature we control gains flying until the end of turn. Perfect way to actually give Hurska flying, just fly over any blockers and close out the game on commander damage. And on top of that, and the reason why this card is in the win con condition is the second passive ability. At the beginning of each end step, it checks if we gained 3 or more life that turn. If we did, we get to create a 3/3 flying bird token that has the same ability on attack as this card. And like I just talked about with the weird horse card, the fact that this card checks the life gain criteria every single end step means you can get to create 4 creature tokens in a turn cycle. The only thing you have to do is crack a food token in each player's turn or gain 3 life through another way. And if you are able to generate a couple of these creature tokens, you can just swing with them, give all your other creatures flying, and you will be able to close out the game. Motivated Pony, another really weird budget version of a Crater Hoof Behemoth specifically for food decks. It's a 5 mana 3/3 creature with trample and haste. Whenever this creature attacks, all attacking creatures will get +1/+1 until the end of turn. But if a food entered the battlefield this turn, your creatures will get an additional +2/+2 instead, resulting in a total +3 power and +3 toughness boost. And then we also get to untap all our attacking creatures, giving them some sort of pseudo vigilance. Now the reason this card is included in the deck is because it's just that good with Hurska. If you have Hurska on the battlefield, you can just drop this guy, swing with everything instantly because this creature has haste. You will get both attack triggers on the stack. You then choose to first put a food into play thanks to Hurska's attack trigger, and then you resolve this card's effect. Untapping everything, giving everything +3/+3, and actually giving an overrun effect to everything. Sadly, once again, minus the trample, but otherwise this card would just be way too good. Nykthos Paragon, a massive 6 mana 4/6 enchantment creature. Whenever we gain life, we can put that many +1/+1 counters on each creature we control. Sadly, this ability only triggers once per turn. So if you have a board full of hobbits or creature tokens you just generated with all the other cards in this section, you can now start turning your life gain into massive permanent boosts for your entire board. Let's say you have a total of 5 creatures on the battlefield, you can just crack a food token, you will gain 3 life, and you will be able to put 3 counters on each creature you control, turning one simple food token into a massive amount of 15 +1/+1 counters. And since in this deck we do have a ton of ways to gain life on instant speed, we can sort of bypass the once per turn mechanic. You can just crack a food token in an opponent's turn or cast a huge life gain spell in an opponent's turn, and you will be able to also get additional counters in your opponent's turns. True Conviction, a 6 mana enchantment that will give all your creatures lifelink and double strike. Now obviously this is one of the best enchantments ever printed, although it does come at quite a high mana cost. But in this deck, thanks to Hurska, you can get additional value out of the double strike and lifelink when you combine those 2 keywords. Let's say you have this card and Hurska on the battlefield, and you then swing with a 5/5 creature at one of your opponents. First, you will go to the first strike damage step, where you will gain 5 life thanks to the lifelink. You will then get a Hurska trigger and the ability to pay 1 mana to give that creature a +5/+5 stat boost. When you do, you now go to the normal damage step, where the double strike damage will be dealt, and the creature will now deal 10 damage and gain you you 10 life. When you have double strike and lifelink with Hurska on the field, you can actually just gain life in the first strike damage step, get a Hurska trigger, and then use the stat boost of Hurska to deal additional damage in the normal double strike damage step. This might be some sort of a win more card in the deck, but I honestly don't care. The interaction this card has with Hurska is just way too cool. And the last card in this section is Resplendent Angel, a 3 mana 3/3 flying creature. And like the other creatures in this section, at the beginning of each end step, it will check if you gained 5 life that turn. And if you did, you get to create a 4/4 flying Vigilance Angel token. Now obviously this card is harder to trigger than the other cards in this section, because you can't just crack a food token to actually gain 5 life. You do need to crack 2 food tokens or gain life through another way. But creating 4/4 flying Vigilance tokens is nothing to mess with, and these tokens can take over the game really quickly. And on top of that, for 6 mana you can give this creature +2/2 and lifelink until the end of turn, turning it into a flying 5/5 lifelink body, which if you then block with it or connect with it for combat damage will already gain you 5 life and guarantee you an angel token. Instead of this card, you can also play a somewhat similar card, being Valkyrie Harbinger, a 6 mana card that will also give you a 4/4 flying Vigilance creature token if you gain 4 or more life that turn. Now this card already has lifelink in itself and you don't have to activate an ability to give it to this creature, but that being said, I'd rather play a 3-drop creature than an actual 6-drop creature. It's just way more efficient in my opinion. Next up we have the acceleration section. Now Hurska is a really cheap commander you can cast for the low cost of 3 mana. But the real power in this deck actually comes from being able to keep our mana open to sacrifice our food tokens and activate Hurska's ability. The cards in this section will ensure we always have enough mana open to never be stuck in a weird decision where we want to decide between casting a creature, sacrificing our food tokens, or boosting creatures with Hurska. The more mana we have available to us, the scarier this deck becomes. First up, we play 3 1 mana 1/1 mana dorks, a Llanowar Elves, an Elvish Mystic, and an Evanescence Pilgrim. Simple creature bodies you can drop as early as turn 1, and these will allow you to get Hurska out as early as turn 2. And as you saw earlier in this video, we do have a ton of ways to turn our life gain into counters we can put onto creatures so we can actually start growing these 1/1 creature bodies. Sol Ring, yeah, obviously it is included because it's just one of the most efficient mana rocks ever printed. And a Sol Ring basically gives us a free activation of a food token every single turn because we can just use the 2 generic mana it produces. Wild Growth, a 1 mana enchant land card that we can just attach to a land, and that land will tap for an additional 1 green mana. Another tool to start accelerating our mana from as early as turn 1, and another way we can get Hurska out by turn 2 and start generating those food tokens. And obviously you could have guessed this card was gonna be in a food deck, Gilded Goose, a 1-drop mana dork that actually interacts with food tokens. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to generate a food token. We can tap this creature to sacrifice a food and generate 1 mana of any color. As you know by now, we will always have food tokens to turn into mana with this, just making this into a really reliable mana dork. For 2 mana and tapping this creature, it also will generate us a food token. Not the most efficient way to generate food tokens, but if you really need them, I guess this card is perfect for that. And later in the game, since this is a flying body, you can just cast some huge life gain spells and give this creature a huge stat boost with Hurska. Then you can swing with this creature, and since it has flying, it will be really easy to connect with to your opponents. Herd Heirloom, a 2 mana rock we recently got in the Tarkir Dragonstorm set. And it's honestly one of the stronger mana rocks you can play in any green deck in my opinion. The first ability allows you to tap it and add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. But you can only use this mana to cast creature spells, which usually in this deck doesn't really matter that much. And the second ability will give any creature we control with power 4 or greater trample and an additional ability until the end of turn. And the ability reads, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. Thanks to this card also giving trample, it's almost guaranteed you will be dealing combat damage and you will be drawing a card of this. And as you can imagine, thanks to Hurska, we will be able to boost our creatures to insane amounts of power. Then just having the ability to give trample thanks to something as simple as a really efficient mana rock just makes it absolutely crazy, and you can actually win games out of this 2 mana card. Rampant Growth. For 2 mana we get to search our library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Allows you to filter basic lands out of your deck, reducing the chances you actually draw lands later in the game, and it just accelerates your mana. Really simple but really efficient. Heaped Harvest. A 3 mana artifact food. Whenever this card enters a battlefield or whenever we sacrifice it, we get to search our library for a basic land card and put it on the battlefield tapped. And since it is a food, it has the same ability as a food token. For 2 mana, tapping it and sacrificing it, we get to gain 3 life. Now what this card essentially does is allow you to filter 2 basic lands from your deck onto the battlefield. But in total, this would require a total of 5 mana invested, since first you get land when you cast it for 3, and then you have to sacrifice it for 2 to get the second land. Good thing for us, we are playing a food deck and this card has the food subtype, because you can just play this and then sacrifice this card to an effect like Peregrine Took or Samwise Gamgee. Since it doesn't specify we have to sacrifice it by paying the 2 mana and tapping it, this will also trigger its effect and allow us to go fetch a land without even paying the additional 2 mana for it. Really efficient and really underrated card in my opinion. Jaheira, Friend of the Forest. This card functions in somewhat of the same way as Knight of Sweet's Revenge. Any token we control will get a new ability, and that is that we can tap it to add 1 green mana to our mana pool. This will allow us to tap any food token we control for mana. If you created some creature tokens with any of the finisher cards in this deck, you will now also be able to use them for mana. And if you have an Academy Manufacturer and you are able to generate a huge amount of food, clue and treasure tokens, you can now tap all of those tokens for mana. The amount of mana this card will give you is just absolutely ridiculous. And the last card in this section is Accomplished Alchemist, a 4 mana creature that functions as a mana dork. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Now I know this seems really bad, but trust me, you'll never be using the first ability. The second ability is the ability you'll be using. You can tap this creature to add X mana of any color to your mana pool, X being the amount of life you gain this turn. And as you can imagine, in this deck, this can get out of hand really quickly. If you have this card on the battlefield and you are able to crack a couple of clue tokens, lifelink a huge amount, or cast a big healing spell like Feed the Clans, this card will suddenly generate you like 8, 10, 20 mana, which you can then use to just get a huge amount of Hurska stat boost or play every card you have available to you in your hand. Quick story time. Whenever the Duskmourn set released, I decided to go full Finance Bro mode and actually purchase 12 full art foil Leylines of Hope. For some reason, I thought this card was gonna be the new Lifegain staple and actually shoot up in price. Spoiler alert, it never did. And the funniest part about this, it's not even good enough to make the cut in this Hurska deck. Sure, it's nice to have a Leyline in your opening hand, but usually you will draw this and it isn't worth the mana cost. So yeah, if anyone needs a copy or 12, just hit me up. Next up, we have the draw and support section. Since we are in Selesnya colors, card draw really isn't our strongest suit. And that's why these cards are this important. They give us a way to keep our hand filled throughout the game. And the support pieces are just awesome synergy cards that didn't fit into any other category. Idol of Oblivion, a 2 mana artifact we can tap to draw a card, but we can only activate this ability if we created a token this turn. Now you can be sure in this deck we will be generating a food token every single turn, either by swinging with Hurska or just generating a food token by using any of the food token generators in this deck. And for 8 mana, tapping this and sacrificing it, we also get to create a 10/10 Eldrazi token. Honestly, I do play Idol of Oblivion in a ton of my decks, but I have never ever used this ability. Halia, Guided by Light, an awesome new Lifegain card we got in the Edge of Eternity set. Whenever Halia, another creature we control, or another artifact we control enter the battlefield under our control, we get to gain 1 life. Now gaining instances of 1 life isn't really that useful in this deck, since Hurska will see these as separate triggers and you have to pay 1 mana to give a creature a +1/+1 stat boost. This is just the perfect card to gain additional life and trigger any of our token generating creatures that check if we gained like 3, 4 or 5 life in a turn. Because whenever you play a creature, create a creature token or create a food token, you get to gain 1 life. And at the beginning of our end step, if we gained 3 or more life this turn, we get to draw a card. Just playing Halia and creating a food token with Hurska by attacking will already gain you 2 life. If you can just gain 1 more point of life gain, this card will guarantee you a card draw at the end of each of your turns. Or you can just trigger this effect by cracking a food token. And on top of all those abilities, this card also has the warp mechanic for a measly cost of 1 mana. Meaning you can cast this card for your hand for just 1 mana, but it does get exiled at the beginning of your end step. Then you can cast this card from exile by actually paying its full mana cost. This is just a perfect way earlier in the game to actually get some additional card draw, because you can just play this for 1 mana, and if you then are able to gain 2 more life during that turn, you will get to draw a card, because you can stack the triggers that you actually get to draw a card first, and then this card gets warped out. Very solid new card for any sort of life gain deck. Good seal. Malamat Exemplar, a 3 mana creature that basically has the same effect as Grand Abolisher. Your opponents can cast spells during your turn, meaning you don't have to stress during your turn about your creatures being removed, someone playing a bounce spell, someone playing an instant speed board wipe. Your opponents can't use any tricks. And whenever any creature you control with power bigger than its base power deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. And this is really easy to trigger in a Hurska deck. Just attack with something, sacrifice a food, pay for Hurska's ability, and the requirement will be met and you will be able to draw cards of swinging with your creatures. Pulse of Murasa, a 3 mana instant speed spell that allows you to return a land or a creature from your graveyard to your hand, and you also gain 6 life in the process. A really simple recursion card that allows you to return any creature that got removed over the course of the game straight from your grave to your hand, and you will be able to cast it again. And on top of that, it also functions as a spell that will gain you 6 life, which you can then turn into an insane stat boost with Hurska. The fact that you can also use this card on instant speed can actually help you generate some tokens with our finishers during an opponent's turn. The Gaffer. At the beginning of each end step, this creature will check if you gain 3 life this turn. And if you did, you get to draw a card. This is basically the better version of Halia minus the Lifegain effect. Because unlike Halia, this creature will trigger at the beginning of each end step. So if you are able to gain 3 life during each opponent's turn, this card will actually draw you 4 cards per turn cycle. You can basically just crack a food token during each opponent's turn, and this card will generate you an insane amount of card advantage. Really crazy effect, especially for a 3-drop creature. Exemplar of Light, a flying body that will get a +1/+1 counter whenever you gain life. This effect in itself is already really solid. A flying body that will just keep on growing over the course of the game. And if your opponents don't have a way to deal with this, at some point this creature will just win you the game. And in addition to that, whenever a +1/+1 counter is put on this creature, we get to draw a card. And this ability only triggers once per turn, essentially turning all of our life gain into additional card draw. And like I explained with the previous card, you can just gain life during your opponent's turns, and this card will draw you 4 cards per turn cycle. Greater Good, a 4 mana enchantment with an activated ability. The ability allows us to sacrifice a creature and then draw cards equal to that creature's power. After we did, we have to discard 3 cards. You can just boost the stats of your creatures with Hurska, swing with them, deal combat damage, and then sacrifice them to Greater Good. And since your creatures will always be at a huge amount of power, you will be able to draw a ton of cards of them. You will have to discard 3, but usually the power will be this high that you will always net like 4, 5, 6 cards in the process. By far the best card draw spell in the entire deck. Well of Lost Dreams. Whenever we gain life, we get the ability to pay X amount of mana, X being less than or equal to the amount of life we just gained. If we do, we get to draw X cards. Now, especially later in the game, this card allows you to convert any mana you don't need into free card draw. Because now, for example, if you crack a food token, you are now able to pay up to 3 mana to draw up to 3 cards. And if you don't have 3 mana, you can just pay 1 mana to draw 1 card. Paying 1 generic mana to draw 1 card is a really good deal, especially with cards like the Cabbage Merchant and Jaheira, which allow you to tap your food tokens for mana. This card is absolutely crazy. Shamanic Revelation, a card that would fit both the life gain section and the card draw section. Whenever you cast this, you get to draw 1 card for each creature you control. Since we are a creature heavy deck, this will always draw you like 5 to 10 cards. And in addition to that, this card also has the Ferocious mechanic, actually giving us 4 life gain for each creature we control with power 4 or greater. Now, especially later in the game, if you are able to generate some huge horses, angels, or put a huge amount of counters on creatures you control, this actually functions as an immensely huge life gain spell. If you are able to generate 20 life with this effect for just 1 mana with Hurska, you can turn this into a +20/+20 stat boost. The only downside of this spell is the fact that it is a sorcery speed spell, and you can't actually use this card to trick your opponents and deal a huge amount of damage thanks to the Hurska Hurska buff. Disciple of Freelize, a 6 mana MDFC card. It's a 3 mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield allows us to sacrifice any other creature. When we do, we get to gain X life and draw X cards, X being that creature's power. If you just boosted a creature's stats with Hurska and you can follow up with this creature later in the game, you will be gaining a huge amount of life of this effect and you will be drawing an immense amount of cards. Now for 6 mana this isn't the best effect, but since this is an MDFC land, there's no downside to including this card in the deck. Because if you draw into this card earlier in the game and you have no use for this card, you can just play the backside, which is a land that taps for green mana, and you can even make it enter untapped by paying 3 life for it, making it function as some sort of a basic forest. Next up we have the protection and interaction section. Every deck needs ways to protect its value creatures and deal with threats across the table. And that's what these cards are. Either they allow us to remove our opponent's creatures or protect our own value pieces. Paw to Exile and Swords to Plowshares. 2 1 mana instant speed spells that allow you to exile any creature on the board on instant speed. These are by far the most efficient removal spells ever printed. And later in the game you can use Swords to Plowshares to exile one of your own creatures and you will be able to gain a ton of life in the process, which you can then use combined with Hurska to give an immense stat boost to something, or just trigger any of the Lifegain synergies in this deck. Restoration Magic, a 1 mana instant speed spell with the tiered mechanic, meaning we have to choose 1 additional cost whenever we cast this spell. Tier 1 will just give 1 permanent hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. A perfect way if someone is using a spot removal spell on Hurska or any of your other valuable creatures. The second tier will do the same thing but also gain us 3 life in the process, allowing us to get an additional life gain trigger, and the highest tier will cost us a total of 5 mana, but it will give all our permanents hexproof and indestructible, and we also get to gain 6 life in the process. Now paying 5 mana to give your entire board hexproof and indestructible might seem like a really overcosted effect, but remember you can also just keep 1 mana open to protect one of your permanents. Like I keep mentioning throughout all my videos, versatility really is what makes Magic cards good. And the additional life gain you get out of the tiers on this card is just a pretty nice little extra benefit. Downstruce, a 2 mana instant speed spell that will give you and all permanents you control hexproof until the end of turn. Perfect protection from spot removal or when someone is using a combo that actually targets you as a player. If someone wants to deal like 7 million targeted damage to you by using a Bresh counter combo, you can just cast this and he won't be able to target you, preventing your opponent from winning the game. And this card also has the gift mechanic, meaning whenever we cast this card, we do get the option to gift a card to an opponent, meaning they get to draw a card. When we do, all our permanents will also get indestructible until the end of turn. You can even use this to protect your food tokens from some mass artifact removal. Swiftfoot Boots. Everyone knows this card. It's a 2 mana equipment card you can equip for 1 mana, and it will give the equipped creature hexproof and haste. Protects Hurska from any sort of spot removal or targeted abilities, and you can use this to give Hurska or any of your other creatures haste and actually start generating food tokens the moment she hits the battlefield. Beast Within, a 3 mana instant speed spell that allows you to destroy any permanent on the board. The controller of that permanent will get to generate a 3/3 beast token. This card is good because it basically deals with anything. You can even target lands with this card. If you're playing against a landfall player and they have a Field of the Dead on the field which is just about to take over the entire game, you can just Beast Within it, give them a small creature token, and their game plan is disrupted. Bridgeworks Battle, another MDFC card. For 3 mana you get to give one of your creatures +2/+2 until the end of turn, and then that creature fights a creature you don't control. This card basically just functions as a 3 mana removal spell in this deck. And once again, if you don't need a removal spell, you can just play the backside of this card, which is a land that taps for green mana and even enters untapped if you want to. There are no reasons not to play any of the MDFC lands in your decks. Night of Autumn. This 3 mana creature will allow you to choose one of 3 options whenever it enters the battlefield. First option allows it to enter with 2 additional +1/+1 counters. Yeah, you just get a creature body, but honestly you'll never be using this ability. Second ability allows you to destroy any artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. Very solid ability to deal with any problematic artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. And the third option allows you to gain 4 life, which you can use to boost the creature's power and toughness with Hurska or trigger any of the other Lifegain synergies in this deck. And the last card in this section is Starfall Invocation, a 5-mana sorcery that will destroy all creatures on the battlefield. Now I know we are a creature-based deck, but sometimes you just need to reset the board, because you can't win the game if you are about to lose the game. And in addition to being a board wipe, this card also has the gift mechanic, meaning if we cast this and let an opponent draw one measly card, we get to return one creature that was destroyed this way to the battlefield. So this basically functions as a board wipe for every player, but we get to gain value out of this because we can just reset the board, return Hurska or a value creature to the battlefield, and we will already be one step ahead. Next up, we have the lands. Now, since this is a 100 euro budget build, the mana base for this deck is really simple. No fancy shock lands or fetch lands here, because Hurska doesn't need them anyways, honestly. For as long as you have access to white or green mana to activate her ability and crack food tokens, you're perfectly fine. We also play a couple of utility lands, so I'll start by going over those. The Shire. This land will enter the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary creature. Now we do play quite a lot of legendary creatures in this deck, or you can just play Hurska first and then drop this land. And for 2 mana, tapping this land and an untapped creature we control, we get to generate a food token, making this into a land that basically has no downsides and can allow us to generate additional food tokens. Rogue's Passage. A land that taps for a colorless mana, and for 4 mana, tapping it, we can make target creature unblockable until the end of turn. Now I'm gonna be honest, I'm not that big of a fan of Rogue's Passage, but in this type of deck you can actually win games of it. Because for example, if you do have a magical hand and you can swing with Hurska, then cast a spell that will gain you 10 life, follow it up with a Fortifying Draught, and then make Hurska unblockable, you can just take an opponent out of the game out of nowhere. It also has a really good synergy with Field Fright Testing Pants, as you will be gaining a ton of life, and if you can then just make a creature unblockable and get like 1,000,000 damage through, this will just be crazy. Mosswort Bridge. Whenever this land enters the battlefield, we get to hide away 4, meaning we get to look at the top 4 cards of our library, then pick one of those cards and exile it under this land, face down. Then for 1 green mana and tapping this land, we can actually cast the exiled spell for free. But we can only activate this ability if we control a total amount of power on the board of 10 or greater. Now thanks to Hurska's stat boosting, this is a really easy requirement to meet. And just imagine hideawaying one of your more expensive cards like a True Conviction and being able to cast it for free. And for the regular mana producing lands, we play a Canopy Vista, a Command Tower, a Sungrass Prairie, a Sun Battle Grove, and for basics we play 14 forests and 13 plains. And last up we have the upgrade section. This is actually the most lengthy upgrade section I've ever done on this channel, and for good reason, because Lifegain has one of the deepest pools of expensive cards that are just insane with any sort of Lifegain synergies. At the end of this section I will also flash into the screen the swaps I'd make in this deck so you actually know what cards to change out. Small disclaimer, I won't be covering the mana base for this deck, because obviously you can upgrade the mana base by using expensive lands like a Boseiju or an Ganjo, but honestly you don't need any of these expensive lands to make this deck work. If you want an overview of the cards in the upgrade section, go to the Moxfield Decklist, drop a like while you're there, enable tags, scroll down to the considering section, and then you'll see all the cards I'm gonna talk about under the upgrade stack. Ocelot Pride, a 1 mana first strike lifelink creature. At the beginning of our end step, if we gained life this turn, we get to create a 1/1 cat token. Then, if we have the City's Blessing, meaning whenever we control 10 or more permanents, which we will do at all times thanks to our food tokens, or each token that entered the battlefield under our control this turn, we get to create an additional copy of that token. And this ability is honestly just ridiculous, especially on something as simple as a 1-drop creature. It will double all the food tokens we make, it will double all the cat tokens this card makes itself, it will double any of the angel tokens any of our game finishers will make, it will double our horse tokens, it will double all tokens generated of Academy Manufacturer. Yeah, the value on this card is just absolutely insane, and I still can't believe to this day this card is just a 1-drop. Talking about 1-drops, Saga Ascendant, a 1 mana 1/1 lifelink creature. Or is it? Because whenever you are at 30 or more life, this creature will also gain +5/5 and flying, making this into a 6/6 flying lifelink creature for just 1 mana. And as all of you know, you will start a game of Commander at 40 life, which means from turn 1 you can just pay 1 mana to play a 6/6 flying lifelink creature. Yeah, this is probably one of the most insane starts you can get in any game. Shadow Spear, a 1 mana equipment that will give the equipped creature +1/+1, lifelink and trample. Since we will be able to give our creatures insane stat boosts thanks to Hurska, the trample is just fantastic on this card. Because even though you are able to boost a creature to like 100 power, it's not really that relevant if an opponent can block it with a 1/1 squirrel token. Shadow Spear solves that problem. And thanks to the lifelink, you will be able to gain an insane amount of life whenever you swing with a creature attached with this equipment. And on top of that, it also has an activated ability for the low cost of 1 generic mana. Permanents your opponents control lose hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. So if you're playing against one of the Taros gods or a Voltron deck that relies on making their commander hexproof and indestructible, for the low cost of 1 mana you can just make them lose those abilities and you will be able to use your removal spells to actually deal with the problem. Heroic Intervention. For 2 mana on instant speed you get to give all permanents you control hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. This is by far one of the most efficient cards to protect both your creatures and your artifacts from being destroyed by board wipes. This card honestly should have been included in the main deck, but I couldn't make it fit in the €100 budget. Heliod Suncrowned, a 3 mana 5/5 indestructible enchantment creature. For as long as your devotion to white is less than 5, Heliod actually isn't a creature. It's just an enchantment and you can't swing or block with it. But honestly, his body is not the reason why we play it in the deck. Whenever we would get an instance of life gain, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or enchantment we control. Having a 3 mana indestructible enchantment engine that will just keep growing our board for what we already want to do, gaining life, is just really efficient. And it doesn't stop there. For 2 mana, we can give any creature we control lifelink until the end of turn. Once again, really efficient. Giving lifelink for the low cost of 2 mana is just very solid. And thanks to lifelink actually triggering in separate instances, this will translate into your creatures getting even more +1/+1 counters thanks to Heliod. Nuka-Cola Vending Machine. A 3 mana artifact that's basically made for food decks. For 1 mana and tapping this artifact, we get to generate a food token. Just adding to the amount of food tokens we can already produce in this deck. Whenever we sacrifice a food token, we get to generate a tapped treasure token. This card basically recycles our food tokens into treasure tokens. As I already mentioned 10 million times in this video, the amount of food tokens you will have on the board will just be absolutely insane. If you can then just sacrifice those food tokens to a card like Peregrine Took, for example, you will get to draw cards of it and you will just get 3 treasure tokens back in the process, which is just an insane amount of mana you can use later in the game to crack even more food tokens, cast any of your creatures, or to pay for Hurska's ability. Nuka-Cola Vending Machine is an auto-inclusion in any sort of food deck, but sadly it does come at quite a hefty price and I couldn't include it in the budget list of this deck. Aetherflux de Reservoir. Whenever you cast a spell, you will gain 1 life for each spell you've already cast this turn. This means your first spell will gain you 1 life, the second spell will gain you 2, 3, 4, 5. It just keeps adding up the more spells you cast. And since these are all separate triggers, you can use Hurska's ability on every one of these triggers to convert them into stat boosts. And this card is probably also one of the best win cons you can play in any sort of life gain deck. And the ability is really simple. You can pay 50 life to deal 50 damage to any target. In this video, I haven't even talked once about the fact that you will constantly be like above 100 life in this deck. This will make it really hard for your opponents to take you out, or it just turns it into an insane resource you can use with Aetherflux Reservoir to actually just start pinging your opponents out of the game. Because usually later in the game, if opponents have been swinging at each other, each opponent will be around like 20 or 30 life and you can just use 50 life to delete an opponent from the game. Chroma's Will, a 4 mana instant speed spell that allows you to choose one of 2 insane options whenever you cast it. You can use this card to give all creatures you control flying, vigilance and double strike until the end of turn, a fantastic option to close out the game with, or you can use it more defensively to give all your creatures lifelink, indestructible and protection from each color until the end of turn, which will essentially make your entire board unblockable, indestructible and gain you a ton of life in the process. But the best part about this card is whenever you control your commander, when you cast this, you actually get to pick both options. Yeah, the ultimate game-winning spell for just 4 mana. Giggling Skitterspike, a 4 mana indestructible 1/1 artifact creature. Whenever this creature attacks or becomes the target of a spell, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. What is this card doing in a Lifegain deck? It is in the deck because it has an insane synergy with Hurska's stat boosting. Because let's say for example you have this creature on the battlefield and you cast a spell that will gain you 10 life. You can then just pay 1 additional mana for Hurska's ability, give this creature plus 10 power, and whenever you then swing with it, it will deal a total of 11 damage to each opponent. Just start throwing buffs on this creature and the amount of damage it will be able to do will be absolutely crazy. And the fact that this card has indestructible means you can just cast it and it will sit there on the battlefield and your opponents basically have no way to deal with it. Because if they do target it with an exile-based removal spell, it will also trigger and deal damage to every opponent. And for 5 colorless mana, it also has the monstrous 5 ability, meaning you can put 5 +1/+1 counters on this creature if you already haven't activated this ability. Perfectly fine way to boost this creature's base stats to 6/6. Alhamaget's Archive, a 5 mana artifact that, like the Wind Crystal and Rock's Fate Mender, will double any amount of life we gain. And on top of that, if we would draw any card outside of the card we draw during our draw step, we actually get to draw 2 cards instead. Perfect late game card that doubles our card draw and doubles our life gain. Archangel of Toon. This is in my opinion the most broken life gain card ever printed. For 5 mana you get a 3/4 flying lifelink body, and whenever you would gain any amount of life, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, including Archangel of Toon. Just imagine having Halia on the field and gaining life whenever you create a creature token, a food token. Every single instance of life gain will just boost your entire board. And you also have the fact that this creature will grow itself and it will turn into a huge flying lifelink body. Archangel of Toon is just a straight upgrade over any of the win-con cards we play in this deck. It is just miles ahead of any other option. And the last card in the upgrade section, and the most expensive card, is the Great Henge. It's a 9 mana legendary artifact, but its cost is reduced by X generic mana, X being the greatest amount of power amongst creatures we control. It just combines perfectly with Hurska's stat boosting. Usually you can just boost one of your creatures up to more than 7 power and you will be able to cast the Great Henge for just 2 mana. And the Great Henge just has some fantastic effects. It functions as a mana rock. You can tap to add 2 green mana to your mana pool, and it will also gain you 2 life. And whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, it gets a cute little +1/+1 counter, and we also get to draw a card. So this card is just a really efficient mana rock that gives us 2 mana, 2 life, additional +1/+1 counters, and an insane amount of card draw. And that's it for my Hurska Sweet Tooth in-depth deck tech. And honestly, this is the most fun I've ever had building a deck for this channel. I've done Lifegain decks before, but never one that focused on food tokens. Most of these cards were absolutely new to me, and I got to learn a ton of new cards in the process. And this deck just plays really smooth, especially for a €100 budget deck. I can promise you, you will have a blast discovering all the food synergies in this deck while you're playing it. If you made it this far into the video, drop a honeypot emoji in the comments below so I know you watched the entire video. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon. And if you have a girlfriend and you want to get her into Magic, just share this cute little commander with her. She'll absolutely love it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.